Welcome to Caregivers Haven podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping families who are caregivers of a loved one with a mental illness gain peace of mind. Even though this is a podcast focused on family caregivers of the mentally ill, much of the discussion can be helpful to any caregiver. Your host is Sandra, your caregiver nurse consultant who, as a family caregiver, shares her passion for helping others and her lived experiences as a caregiver to provide education, support, and resources to other families. Sandra is a registered nurse and many of her guests are healthcare professionals. However, this is not a professional podcast, nor will be associated with any mental health counseling or medical doctor. Please seek help with a professional provider if needed.
Hey, caregivers, how are you today? I hope you're all taking time to rest, relax, and rejuvenate. We know that we can't continue our caregiving journey without taking care of ourselves. We can't serve from an empty vessel. So I'm always going to remind you of that, and hopefully you're all doing okay. So today we have Sheila here as a guest. Sheila, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Thank you for joining us. So Sheila and I met at the beginning of the year. We were both in a yoga teacher training class together. And Sheila has also worked in behavioral health since the year 2000 with a range of client populations from children to adults living with developmental challenges and various mental health issues. She's also worked in the K through 12 school system with children with special education and severe mental health challenges. She's currently the director of mental health and substance abuse with the Foothills AIDS Project. And so today she is actually here to share her caregiving journey with her sister, who she'll share, just give you some tips on caregiving during that time. So Sheila, are you ready to let us know who you were a caregiver for and what their illness was?
Yes. I actually was the caregiver for my sister who was battling pancreatic cancer, which actually ended and she transitioned back in 2017.
Okay, so for all of you listeners out there, our two previous guests were actually talking about their current caregiving journey. And so what Sheila is sharing with us today is she was a previous caregiver. Her sister has transitioned on. And so she's going to be sharing kind of looking back on her caregiving journey. So this may seem like a silly question, but a lot of times people become caregivers and they kind of don't know that they're going to be a caregiver. They just kind of start off helping people and they end up being a full caregiver. So had you planned on being a caregiver for her, or did it just kind of happen?
When you put it that way, no one looks at becoming challenged with cancer. But I was raised to always be a support and a love for my siblings. So it was a natural choice for me when she became in need as she was challenged with the difficulties facing her battle. So when she asked, I willfully accepted that challenge.
Mm-hmm. And so did she have to come live with you, or did you have to go live with her, or did you caregive from a distance?
No, she actually came to live with me, and that was her choice. She wanted to be around her family during that time, knowing all of the difficulties that she was going to have to face and the support that she was going to need. So she actually came and moved in with me and my son. It actually made it easier for me to be a support for her.
Right. So how long from like her symptoms and diagnosis was it before she came to live with you?
Her symptoms started probably a year or 6 months before she actually received the diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And then at that time, she tried doing it on her own, living, 60, 70 miles from her family support. And I would say that maybe 2, 3 months after getting the diagnosis, she made the decision to come and stay.
Mm-hmm. So how long did you take care of her?
For a little over a year, she battled for 13 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I understand about family. I was raised the same way. If anything ever happened to any of my siblings, we would do the same. We've all four of us have been taking care of my mom for most of our lives, and we just kind of share the wealth. I feel like it takes a village. And for those of you who don't even have family, there's still support around. You have to find it. Don't ever feel like you're alone. But we do the same. We do the same with my mom. We all help. So that was good that you were there for her and that she had someone to go to, because there are a lot of people who have to deal with things like this all alone. So it was really good that you were there for her. And one of the things that I like to always point out is that there's support out there. A lot of times people deal with these things alone, and there are support groups, there are social workers, there are people out there who can find help for you. So hopefully, people are starting to hear that more and more from me and don't feel alone.
Right.
So tell me, what was one of your biggest fears when you first started taking care of her, or when you first started hearing about her diagnosis? What was one of your biggest fears?
My fears were not for myself. They were more so for her. My fear was that she would die. So that was probably um, the biggest concern. But I had
Mm-hmm.
to face that, and knowing that maybe if I looked at it in retrospect, would I have the energy to be able to continue with my life and still be able to be all of the support that she needed.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying when you look back, you would wonder if you had the energy. Um, in the midst of all that, did you even think about that at that time as a caregiver?
Well,
Did you just take care of her and not even think about that, or was that part of your fear at that time?
when she asked, there was no question, there was no hesitation. The answer was yes.
Mm-hmm.
As we started acclimating to what that was going to look like, I needed to adjust my world to accommodate for her. I'm
Mm-hmm.
single mother, dealing with a child at that time, in junior high or middle school, they call it now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I still had to deal with being a parent, um,
Mm-hmm.
and then being able to take on that caregiving role. So there were some adjustments that I had to make in my world to
Mm-hmm.
accommodate for that. And though my answer was still yes, it was okay, how am I going to make this happen? How am I going
Right.
to accommodate for the things that I was currently at that time I was in school working on my credential, my PPS credential. So I had a school schedule, I had a internship I had to do, still take care of my own child, work, and then I was taking this on. So I don't think I thought about it when she asked. It was just an automatic response of yes, of course. I saw it as a
Mm-hmm.
privilege and an honor to be able to be there for her. I don't think I thought, I'm going to have to do this. I didn't think like that. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think most of us as caregivers, we do the same thing. The reason I asked that question, I just had a conversation with someone the other night, and we were talking about a time. I took care of my grandmother after she had surgery with breast cancer, and at the time, I had all four of my kids were still home. I think my youngest child was only like a year old, and I was taking care of her and emptying all her tubes and all that. And so I look back on it, and I'm like, how did I do that? Like
Mm-hmm.
at that time, I did not question it at all. But when I look back, it's like, how did I do that? How did I juggle all those things? Because I also worked during that time too. So it was, I just always ask people, like, when they talk about having the energy and stuff, like in that moment, you kind of don't even think about it. You just do what you have to do.
Right.
Which is why, it's important for caregivers to practice self-care, because a lot of times we're not thinking about the toll that it's taking on us. And so, it's just important for us to take care of ourselves. So, and how far back was this? When was this, like a couple of years ago, or?
It was a couple years ago. She got diagnosed in late 2016. Now I have to think about it. She passed in 2017, so she must have been diagnosed in late 2015. So all of 2016, she was with me, and then
Wow.
she transitioned in early 2017.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to handle while you're working full time and taking care of a kid as a single mom. So, do you feel like at the beginning of all this or during this, do you feel like you had, like, what was your biggest frustration, if you had any?
Biggest frustration was the lack of support for me. I didn't have as much support around my system to help do that for her. So a lot of it fell on me. My mother is older. She was probably 80, just turned 80 at that time. So she herself needed, supports and care, which of course, we as the family, the siblings, we would support her as a unit. But when the challenge of dealing with my sister came on top of that, that really just fell on me.
Wow. Yeah, that can be difficult.
It was.
So, yeah. So, since we're talking in retrospect, I normally ask, like, what is your biggest fear? What is your biggest frustration now? So you're not caregiving for her anymore, but do you have any fears or frustrations when you think back during that time?
The frustration was not having enough support, not having a reprieve. Like I said, I still had to live my life and all that it entailed.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to cut that out, I had to learn how to, shop for my household and her needs as well. So that a lot of that changed. My household needs changed that I didn't really think about. Scheduling, picking up, delivering, taking to doctor's appointments, everything that was already on my plate, and then what her world plate now entailed, because her position was all the way back in 60, 70 miles away. So there
Oh,
was
wow.
getting down to the chemo treatments. That was a day's event. It wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, we're going to take a couple hours out and go do, no, that became a day's journey.
Right. Wow. So I have two quotes that I want to read to you, because, and I just want you to think back on it, tell me what they mean to you, and tell me if it would have helped you if you had known about them back then while you were taking care of her. So the first one is, self-care is not about self-indulgence, it's about self-preservation. And that one is by Audre Lorde. And the other one is, rest and self-care are so important. When you take time to replenish your spirit, it allows you to serve others from the overflow. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. And that one is by Eleanor Brown. So how does that resonate with you? And kind of tell me, if you even thought about that during that time, and then tell me how it resonates with you now.
I didn't think about it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I did have some people around me who would remind me that I needed to take care of myself. But, at that time, my biggest challenge was I have fullness of life and she's fighting for hers. So the fullness of life that I have, of course, I'm willing to give that. I didn't think about my well being empty. And I was probably comparing it to her challenges. So my 3/4 full well or my quarter full well was, in comparison, a full 100% well. So I didn't think about that.
Mm-hmm. So, so if you didn't think about it, did you do any self-care practice during that time?
I didn't do it as with the mindset or intention of self-care. I think maybe that's what
Mm,
I would have changed. And that is what I did do from that. That I will say, in looking back, that is how I came to really take self-care as priority. Um,
mm,
and it was out
mhm.
of that that I developed a yoga practice, that I developed a meditation practice, um, because I knew that in order to survive, I needed to do self-care.
Right, right. Totally agree. So during that time, I know you said you didn't practice self-care, but were you doing anything for support? Were you involved in any support groups or, um, classes for, pancreatic cancer or just anywhere? And how did you get support, if any, during that time?
They did talk about, there were support groups offered at with her care, her primary care physician, or I'm sorry, her oncologist, and they offered those pieces, but they were so far away that it just was not practical for us to participate
Mhm.
in that. And the advent of telehealth wasn't as widely accepted or facilitated as it is today, amidst the pandemic that we're dealing with. So there just wasn't readily available resources, um, in this area and what she was associated with. And honestly, I didn't feel like I had time. That was the mindset. I don't have time for that. I've got to get to her doctor's appointment. I've got to get her medication. I've got to get to work. I've got to take care of my. It was it was just my to-do list. I
Right,
was not operating out of
right,
self-care mindset at all.
right. So as caregivers, we all go through that. Like, it's barely enough time in the day to do the things that we have to do. And so, because we're caregivers and we have that compassion for helping someone else, it's really easy for us to think that we just don't have time to take care of ourselves. And I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of true. Like, we really, like, I sometimes I'm like, can it be more hours in the day?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But, but what I like to share with people is that, um, even though we don't have that time, we have 5 minutes, just if you can just sit somewhere quietly and just take some breaths. I mean, you and I have done our yoga teacher training together. That alone, just letting your mind be quiet for 5 minutes and do some breathing. Even if you don't do yoga and know how to do yoga, like, just for all of you listeners out there who are hearing what Sheila is saying, like, she felt like she didn't have time for herself, how I feel that way too sometimes. But just sitting down and being quiet for 5 minutes and just letting your brain take a break is huge. You will not believe, how much more energy and how much, I call it freedom. Like, I just like kind of free my mind just for a few minutes. It can really help.
If I could say the
Um,
one takeaway I would want anyone to take from my experience is I had to learn that putting my self-care first, and meaning the first part of my day,
mhm,
I learned to give that to myself so that out of that I could
mm,
have the opportunity and the fullness of well to continue giving. And I've noticed the difference when I don't do my self-care at the beginning of the day, how much less time and energy I have than when I do make the effort to spend that time in that devotional place to care for
mhm,
myself in the start of my day
mhm,
allows me to continue to go on. That's the piece that I would say I would have liked to have incorporated, and I would have had a lot more to give on the back end. Does that make sense?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, it does. Yep. I mean, it's just like this quote. It says, "You cannot serve from an empty vessel." So a lot of times, when we're not taking care of ourselves, even though we are continuing our caregiving journey, we may not be doing the best that we can do for our loved one or for ourselves, because we're trying to, get that car one more mile on an empty tank.
Right,
You
right.
know, we just have to be mindful of that. So you say you do morning meditation for self-care. What are some other things that you do for self-care?
I really developed a love for a hot bath, Epsom salt or some type of soap, and my candles. that is, that's
Mhm.
definitely, I know how simple that sounds, but no, that has become part of my self-care, self-love practice, is to be able to soak in a bath, to turn, close the door to the rest of the world, and that becomes my time.
Mhm. So I don't know if one of my earlier podcasts, I don't remember if it was episode 2 or 3, but one of the listeners shared that, she was saying once everybody is down and everybody's asleep and, she's by herself, she just um, takes a hot bath. And she said it's symbolic of just
Yes.
washing it away, washing the whole day away, washing everything away, and just sitting and relaxing.
And oftentimes
So,
I'll do a meditation there with that, practice and that mindset of washing it away,
mhm,
just allowing that mental
mhm,
process to go, or focusing on a candle flame, or listening to, a healing sound. And that's another piece that I do, the sound bowls or a healing tone frequencies. Those are just things that I can do for myself without, making that conscious effort. Okay, I've got to sit and meditate. No, it'll be something that I have going on in the background. And it's just allowing me to have another focal point to move away from, my day to days or what's been troubling me, that it's there and it's the sound bath.
right. I think one of the things about this pandemic that that brought a thought to my mind is, we have all this talk about self-care and being quiet and quieting our minds and all that. And one of the things that the pandemic taught me is that, back in the day, our ancestors, our relatives, they didn't have electricity. So once the light, the sun went down, there wasn't a whole lot more that they can do. And so they did a lot more relaxing. My grandmother would sit on the porch. They just did a lot more relaxing than we do nowadays. And so now we have all this self-care stuff, but it's all because we've forgotten how to just be
Mm-hmm.
quiet. We've forgotten how to relax. I just retired from being a registered nurse for 38 years. And as I was working 12-hour shifts, me and my husband raised 4 kids, and I worked ICU my whole entire career, except for the last 8 years, which is pretty crazy. But, just this hyped up lifestyle, and then caregiving in the middle of it is just, my grandmother used to always tell me, just because you can doesn't mean you
Mm,
should.
mm, mm. I needed to hear that one.
Yes, she would tell me that, and it's not until now, when I got a broken down back, and now that I'm tired, that I was like, oh man, she was right, because she would tell me, why are you doing all this? You don't even have to do all this. But we've forgotten to look at and mimic what our ancestors did, and now we're just doing all this high paced stuff. So
I,
I love you about your sound bowls and your bath and your morning meditation.
yeah, that's my love for self. I call it self-love. I know that the common term is
Mhm.
self-care, but really it's about self-love and loving
Yes,
myself first.
absolutely.
And that's what I would say is I love me first.
Right, right. I've seen some people call it that, and I think that is the better word for it, because I was I was in a workshop about a year ago, and they were asking these questions about, well, no, actually that workshop was this year, but they were asking questions about, what's your favorite color, or what's your wardrobe style, or just all these personal questions. And I was sitting there, what's your hobbies? And I was like, I had to think kind of hard on some of those questions. But if someone asked me that about my husband or my children or my grandchildren, I would be able to answer it right
Mm-hmm,
away.
mm-hmm,
But yes, I need to love myself just as much as I love them. I need to know what my favorite things are, just like I know their favorite things. And as a caregiver, and even being a nurse is actually a caregiver. I think my mind has just always been to give, give, give to other people and forget about myself. So I'm doing a lot better, and it's helping me feel
mm-hmm,
better.
mm-hmm. I can't quote the scripture exactly, but being raised in Judeo-Christian thought, um, you know, that scripture where it talks about, or the passage of love your neighbor as you love yourself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we've been conditioned to focus on the love your neighbor piece. But it starts with
Mhm.
as you love yourself. And I think we forget
Yes.
that, oh, me loving externally. No, no. Love me first, for out of that, then I can know how to love you. For if I don't know how to love me, how can I turn and truly love you?
Yes. So it's so ironic. I have never, ever, ever heard anyone say that until a week ago. So, Alicia Brown, I hope you're listening to this podcast because we just verbatim had this same conversation. And that's what she was saying. She was like, we were just talking about how we learn bad habits along the way from Christianity or from our parents that cause us to not take good care of ourselves. And I was telling her that I think at church, when they talk about humility and
Mm-hmm.
being humble, we take that like the wrong way because we kind of like, we're so busy trying to be humble and have humility that we are kind of downplaying ourselves and taking better care of other people. And then she said exactly what you said. She said the scripture that says, love your neighbor as yourself. People forget about the first part. They're so busy trying to love their neighbor and be nice to other people, but it says, love them as you love yourself, which means you love yourself first. We just had that conversation. So I hope she's listening to this.
And out of, what is it, a witness of two or three?
Yes. Yes. So, all right. Thank you for sharing. I have one more question for you. And you've kind of already answered this, but when you were talking about one of the things that you would tell people is, to practice self-care. But I just want to know if there are any other lessons learned or any other encouragement or motivation or inspiration that you can give to our caregivers out there who are either, currently caregiving for someone or they were a caregiver for someone previously and maybe they haven't let that go yet, but just any encouraging or inspiring words, lessons learned that you can share with our listeners.
Well, the first would have been that the self love. Definitely do that. Don't wait to self love. Love yourself first. Be greedy. Be selfish. And I know in our society we're taught that that's not right, but really be selfish so that you can be selfless. But the
Mm-hmm.
other pieces, and in that, probably juxtaposed to that would be, and then demand those around you to be of that support. I would say that's probably something I should have done, is kind of really just put the demand on others to be that help. I didn't do that. Um, it was, okay, well, then I'll do it. Okay, well, then I'll do it. Okay, well, no, let someone else do it. you know, let someone else do it. Ask them to do it. See how they can help. Um, Use your resources. Look for other resources. If it's not where you thought it would be, keep looking. That you don't have to do it alone. Probably my other piece. Don't think you have to do it alone.
Mm-hmm. So I think another trait of many caregivers is not asking for help, not
Mm-hmm,
wanting to bug
mm-hmm.
people, um, thinking you're a burden. And, I was, I was talking to my cousin the other day. I'm really bad about that. I will offer help. And then when people offer me, I'm like, oh, no, that's okay. And it's like, why? Why
Mm-hmm.
do I
Right,
do
right.
that? It's just so ironic. But I talk to so many people, and I think it must be a caregiver trait, because so many caregivers do that. And it may be because we know
Yeah,
how much work it is, and maybe we really don't want to put that burden on someone else. But as part of our self love and our self care, we have to do that. We have to ask for that help so that we can continue going. We have no idea. A lot of times we don't know how long we're going to be a caregiver. And so we have to stay strong and, you know, fill our vessels so that we can continue to take care of our loved ones.
right. So love yourself and be demanding.
So, yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that. I've actually kind of been practicing that recently with cooking dinner. Something as simple as cooking dinner. There are some days where I'm just exhausted, but I would just push myself, and then I just thought, you know what? Anyone can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and so I'm just not
There
going to
you
cook
go.
today.
What is it? Bring your own
Yeah,
meal. Do your make your own meal. Or the stuff's down there. Here,
yeah,
have at it.
right, right. But we just, we get so caught up and that people pleasing. So, all right, Sheila, I really appreciate you coming on. I know, this may have been hard for you because it's only been 2 years, since 2 or 3 years since your sister passed away. But I really appreciate it because it's just giving a different look, because you've been through it, and you can, I feel like a lot of your tips you gave today will be able to help someone out there who's, either taking care of someone, or they're like you, it's over with, and maybe some people have guilt, some people are questioning, some people are thinking, oh, I could have done more. So I think that you sharing that they should have self-love and demand support, I think that could help people to feel better about all of
No,
that.
it was an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, caregivers, I hope you were listening to Sheila. She gave us a whole bunch of nuggets out there about caregiving. So, self-love, making sure you're getting support. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and use your resources, and keep looking. With our podcast with Trey Kearney, she said the same thing. If you can't find the resources that you need, keep looking. So it's the second time we've heard this. So hopefully you guys are listening and taking notes, and I just hope that it will help all of you guys in your caregiving journey to make it a little bit easier and to know that you're not alone. So thank you, Sheila, and hopefully you'll come back on and visit us again.
Yes, thank you for doing this. We really need it out there. You're a blessing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, please hold for a couple of announcements, and then I'll be right back.
Sandra is a registered nurse, and many of her guests are healthcare professionals. However, this is not a professional podcast, nor are we associated with any mental health counseling. Please seek help with a professional provider if needed. You can reach Sandra by listening to the podcast on the Anchor app and leaving a message there. Or you can DM her on Instagram at Caregivers Haven. If you enjoyed listening to Caregivers Haven podcast, please favorite, subscribe, or follow on your listening platform. Okay, guys, thank you for listening. And until next time, Caregivers Haven is wishing you peace of mind and happy Caregivers Month. You can find Sandra on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Caregivers Haven. If you enjoyed listening to Caregivers Haven podcast, please share, subscribe, follow, and favorite.